Hello and welcome back to the studio. In this video, it's gonna be a little bit more casual. It wasn't super well planned out. I kind of just wanted to test out this paint a little bit. My toddler was awake, but he was playing nicely with some of my art supplies, and I ended up having 15 minutes kind of to just paint and explore. But I wasn't sure how much time I would get. I decided to throw on the camera anyway and see how far we could get, and I ended up being able to finish this one. So I'm primarily using one color, which is one of my favorite ways to just study and explore art is to work with one pigment. It really helps me to understand values and composition a little bit better. I do throw in some other colors later, but I'm primarily using Green Apatite Genuine by Daniel Smith. I'm using a Princeton Heritage round brush in the size 8, and I will use this brush for the entire painting, which is kind of my go-to, especially if I'm working loose like this. I tend to just grab one brush and just keep going, and I don't know, loose painting for me, it's very intuitive. It's just very much playing with color theory rather than trying to get all of the details just right. So one of the reasons that I picked this pigment is because it separates, and so you can already see on my palette there's some saturated cooler greens, and then there's less saturated or less bright and vibrant colors that are a little bit warmer, and I really wanted to kind of play with this, and I was hoping they would separate a lot more than they ended up doing. But it was just kind of an opportunity for me to explore. If I wanted them to separate more, I could get that effect by adding more blooms in it, so like adding water into it before it's fully dried and allowing the paint a little bit more time to separate. And I don't want this clover to be necessarily textbook. I want there to be a lot of movement with it. And so you'll see that my lines twist back and forth. There's a lot of curving. There's a lot of, again, movement, for lack of a better term. I really like my flowers to dance, and this is no exception here. So there's a lot of careful brush control as I'm, making these more arcing lines and trying to move my whole body along with my brush. By contrast, of course, these little leaves, while I'm going to try and add some variety and movement to them, they're a little bit more stockier and a little bit more heavy visually, and so I like kind of the contrast there. And so I'm just kind of playing around with that. Like I said, if I could go back and do it again, I'd probably add a little bit more water, kind of intentionally add a bloom in there to get a little bit more of a divide. But I was just kind of exploring. Like I said, I wasn't sure how much time I had, so I just wanted to make the most of it. While everything is still fairly damp, I wouldn't really call it wet, I'm adding some details in here. Some clovers have this, some don't. A lot of them, it's actually more of a white detail, which I was looking at later, but I actually like it with the dark detail, and that was a little easier to add it on. If you didn't want to add that detail, another great option would be to make some of the leaves much darker and some of them lighter, just so that you're getting some contrast, some differentiation in the values, and creating a more interesting painting overall. And again, just curving lines in different directions. I'm trying to go very slowly, moving my whole arm to help make everything very smooth and consistent. And then I'm going over while everything is still wet with another layer of paint to get a darker value overall. Now to get these broader leaves, I'm taking my brush and I'm pressing it down and then picking it up again, obviously. And I need to do 2 strokes for each of these leaves because they are so broad. If you want to avoid doing that and be able to do it kind of more in just one brush stroke, either using like what is it? Like a cat's tongue or a softer brush like a Princeton Neptune. Those are watercolor brushes, and so they're much more flexible. They have a little bit more give. This is a little bit more of like an all-purpose brush, and so it's not as water hungry. It doesn't hold as much water, and so I have a little bit more control more easily. But if I want to get like a really big splay with my brush, I would need to switch to a different brush that's not quite as firm. To create the illusion of depth, I'm going to water down my paint a little bit so that it's a little less concentrated, it's a little bit softer, and it's a little bit lighter. This will give it the appearance of aerial perspective and look like it's farther in the background. I'm also not going to add quite as much detail to this, again, in order to make it appear as though it's in the background. Now that I'm happy with the placement of the leaves, it's time to start thinking about where to place the flowers. So I'm taking a combination of quinacridone magenta and ultramarine blue and mixing this beautiful light purple. And these flowers really could not be any easier to make. I'm just going to do a bunch of dashed lines, but I am going to slightly curve them so that they're all kind of pointing towards the center. And I did build kind of in rows in order to keep it a little bit more uniform and a little bit more like I perceive them to look in nature. I also took a little bit more pigment a couple of times as it was drying and added it into one side so that it had a little bit more of like the effect of a shadow. So one area is a little bit lighter, while on the right hand side it was a little bit deeper, kind of like a shadow. After completing these flowers, I took a step back and I decided we needed one more leaf down here just to add a little bit more weight to the bottom. I didn't want it to be too heavy, so I kept it in the background still, but I still felt like it kind of grounded the piece overall. But that was how I decided to close out this painting. I hope that you enjoyed doing this little exercise with me and that you're having a wonderful, wonderful day. Until next time, happy painting.